what I've been thinking about all week?
That's never a comfortable way to start.
No, but seriously, I was walking through a cemetery near my house, just taking a shortcut actually. And I found myself reading the headstones, all these lives, entire existences compressed into 2 dates and maybe a line or two.
That's a strange mood for a shortcut.
It wasn't morbid though. That's the thing, it was clarifying. Like suddenly all the things I'd been worrying about that morning seemed incredibly small. The email I was anxious about, the conversation I was dreading, all these things that felt so heavy suddenly felt like nothing.
You just accidentally performed one of the oldest spiritual practices in human history.
I did.
You stumbled into Memento Mori, remembrance of death. It's been practiced deliberately for thousands of years across dozens of cultures.
I just thought I was taking a shortcut and got distracted.
Welcome back, everyone, to Abbe Memorabile. I'm Drake.
And I'm Holly, from Time Beyond Memory. We're a podcast from the most ancient anamnetic order of Trikala.
Where we work with students through 15 wisdom traditions over years. Philosophy, yes, but also psychological tools, physical practices, mind, body, spirit integrated.
Weekly one-on-one sessions with a personal guide, plus daily practice that builds over time. For those who are serious about genuine transformation, not just collecting interesting ideas.
And what Holly stumbled into in that cemetery touches something we actually work with directly. The conscious contemplation of mortality.
Which sounds incredibly dark when you put it that way.
But it's not. That's what's so interesting. The ancients discovered something that modern psychology is only now catching up to. That remembering death makes you more alive, not less.
Today we're exploring Memento Mori, the practice of keeping death constantly in mind. Not as morbid obsession, but as, a technology.
A technology of presence, a technology of meaning, a technology of liberation even, and one that appears in nearly every wisdom tradition we work with.
Liberation seems like a strong word.
But think about what holds most people back in life. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of looking foolish. What are all of those fears underneath? They're fears of small deaths. Deaths of reputation, of self-image, of comfort. And underneath all of them is the big death, the actual one.
So confronting the big death puts all the small deaths in perspective, eh?
Exactly. When you've actually sat with the fact that you're going to die, that everyone you love is going to die, that all of this is passing, the small fears lose their grip. What's the worst that could happen if you try something and fail? You'll feel embarrassed, but you're going to die anyway. Better to die having tried.
The Stoics kept skulls on their desks. Buddhist monks meditate in charnel grounds, surrounded by decomposing bodies. Mexican families picnic on graves once a year. Japanese samurai began each morning contemplating their death. Roman emperors had servants whisper, "Remember you are mortal," during their triumphs. What did all these cultures know that we've forgotten?
And why does remembering death consistently show up as one of the most powerful transformation practices across cultures?
Let's find out.
Before we go too deep, I want to frame something.
What's that?
This topic can feel heavy. We're going to talk about death for the next hour. And some people might think, why would I want to spend my precious time thinking about death? Isn't life short enough without dwelling on its end?
That's a fair question.
But the answer is counterintuitive. Every tradition that studied this closely came to the same conclusion. Remembering death doesn't make life feel shorter or darker. It makes life feel more vivid, more precious, more alive. The practice of Memento Mori isn't depressing. It's the antidote to a certain kind of deadness that creeps in when we forget we're mortal.
The deadness of taking things for granted.
Exactly. So let's explore this, not to be morbid, but to become more awake. So let's start with Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, the most powerful man in the world at that time. And he wrote to himself in what we now call the Meditations. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think.
That's so direct. Not, you might die someday, or consider your mortality. You could leave life right now.
Right now, in the next breath, the next heartbeat. And the question he's asking himself is brutal in its simplicity. If this were your last moment, would you be doing what you're doing? Saying what you're saying? Thinking what you're thinking?
That's not comfortable.
It's not meant to be comfortable. Comfort is exactly what the practice disrupts. We spend most of our lives in a kind of trance, assuming we have time, assuming tomorrow is guaranteed, acting like the trivial things that consume us actually matter in any ultimate sense.
And death awareness cuts through that.
Like a blade. Seneca wrote about this obsessively, particularly in his letters to Lucilius. He said we act as if we were going to live forever. No thought of our own frailty ever enters our head. We don't even notice how much time has already gone by.
Gone boy, doing what though? That's the question it raises.
Exactly. Scrolling through things that don't matter. Having arguments about nothing. Accumulating possessions we don't need. Postponing the things that would actually give life meaning. Seneca puts it brilliantly. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it.
Oh, I feel that.
We all do. He says life is long if you know how to use it, but we squander it as if drawing from an inexhaustible supply, when actually every day that passes is one less we'll ever have.
I think about this sometimes when I'm stuck in some petty irritation. Traffic, or someone being rude, or whatever. And I wonder what that would feel like if I knew I only had a week left.
And how does it feel when you frame it that way?
It dissolves. Almost instantly, like who cares? Who cares if this person cut me off or said something dismissive? I'm going to be dead. They're going to be dead. And none of this matters in the way I thought it did 2 seconds ago.
That's the practice working. The Stoics called this the discipline of assent. Between something happening and your response to it, there's a space, a gap. And in that space, you can choose whether to let the irritation take hold or to let it pass through.
But the death awareness makes that space bigger somehow.
It expands the gap between stimulus and response, because suddenly you're operating from a different scale. The person who cut you off in traffic seems trivial when measured against the brevity of existence. The rude comment loses its sting when you remember that both you and the speaker will be dust soon enough.
It's not that the annoyance disappears entirely.
No, you still feel it arise. The initial flash of irritation is almost involuntary, but it doesn't take hold in the same way. It can't get purchase on you because you've shifted the frame. You've zoomed out to a perspective where petty grievances simply don't register.
And this was daily practice for them.
Multiple times daily, really. Morning preparation, evening reflection, and moments throughout the day. Seneca wrote this beautiful letter where he says we should review each day as if it were our last. Not in despair, but in clarity. Have I lived well today? Have I wasted time on things that don't matter? Have I been the person I want to be?
Evening reflection is death practice.
Every night. It was built into their daily routine. The Stoics would sit with the day's events and examine them through the lens of mortality. Did I act as someone would who knew their time was limited? Did I prioritize what actually matters?
And this is something we work with in our tradition too, isn't it?
We do. Not the exact same practice, but this principle runs through many of the pillars. The Stoic material directly, obviously, but also the Buddhist teachings, the mystery traditions, the idea that regular contemplation of your mortality keeps you honest about how you're spending your one life.
And if anyone wants to go deeper into Marcus Aurelius specifically, our sister podcast, The Primary Texts, is doing a complete deep dive into the meditations right now.
Yes, that's worth mentioning. Book by book, passage by passage. Adam really takes his time with it, much more detailed than we can get here.
So, if today's episode sparks something for you about the Stoics, The Primary Texts is where you can really immerse yourself. We'll put a link in the show notes.
It's interesting, though. When you say death practice to most modern people, they get uncomfortable. They think you're being morbid or depressed or trying to be edgy, which tells us something about how disconnected we become from this wisdom. For the Stoics, contemplating death wasn't dark. It was the doorway to actually living. Marcus Aurelius again. Think of yourself as dead. You have lived your life. Now take what's left and live it properly.
Oh, that's extraordinary.
Consider yourself already dead. Everything you had, every ambition, every fear, every attachment, gone. You already died. And now you've been given this strange gift. Extra time. Bonus hours, bonus days, maybe bonus years. How will you use them?
That reframe, that's not morbid at all. It's liberating.
It completely changes your relationship with whatever time remains. Because it's all gift now. It's all unexpected grace. You're not entitled to any of it.
And from that place, you make different choices.
Entirely different. The petty stuff falls away. The things you've been postponing become urgent. The people you love become precious.
Epictetus took this even further, didn't he?
The freed slave who became one of the great Stoic teachers. Yes, he said, when you kiss your child goodnight, say silently to yourself, tomorrow you may be dead. He meant the child, or yourself, both.
That sounds almost cruel, though. Thinking about your child dying while you're kissing them goodnight.
To modern ears, yes. Shockingly so. But Epictetus wasn't saying this to create anxiety or to torment parents. He was saying it to create appreciation. We take for granted that our loved ones will be there tomorrow. We treat them carelessly because we assume there's always more time. We phone in the bedtime routine because we're tired, and we'll do it better tomorrow.
But what if there is no tomorrow?
Then you don't waste that kiss. You don't phone it in. You're actually present for it. You feel the weight of that small head against your shoulder. You notice the smell of their hair, the sound of their breath.
Then every moment together becomes precious.
This is such a different relationship with death than we have now.
Entirely different. We've hidden death away. We've made it something that happens to other people in other places until suddenly and shockingly it happens to us. The Stoics sat with it daily, and that sitting transformed how they lived.
There's also premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, which sounds even darker than a memento mori.
What is that?
It's the practice of deliberately visualizing bad things happening, including your death, but also the death of loved ones, the loss of wealth, exile, illness. You imagine these things in vivid detail, not to attract them or wallow in fear, but to prepare psychologically.
Why would anyone do that to themselves?
Because the things we fear most have power over us precisely because we refuse to look at them. We spend enormous energy keeping them at the edges of awareness. But when you turn and face them directly, something shifts. The fear doesn't disappear, but it loses its grip.
Like exposure therapy.
Very similar principle. The Stoics discovered this empirically, through practice. Modern psychology confirms it. The things we avoid facing grow larger in the shadows. The things we examine directly shrink to their actual size.
Now, the Buddhists took this even further, though, much further.
Into actual charnel grounds, actual corpses.
Tell me about that, because I've heard references to it, but I don't really understand the practice.
So in Buddhist tradition, there's a practice called maranasati, mindfulness of death. And at its most intense form, monks would actually go to cremation grounds, to places where bodies were laid out to decompose, and they would meditate there.
Among the dead.
Among the actively decomposing dead. Not in some sanitized memorial garden, in places where vultures were feeding, where the smell of decay was overwhelming, where death was present in its most visceral form.
That's intense.
It's meant to be intense. The purpose was to directly confront impermanence, not as a concept in a book, not as a philosophical abstraction, but as a visceral, sensory, unavoidable reality. Here is a body that once walked and talked and loved and feared, just like mine does. Here is what it looks like now. Here is what it will become.
And this wasn't considered disturbed or unhealthy?
It was considered essential medicine for a particular kind of delusion. Because the Buddha's core teaching is that suffering comes from attachment. And we're most deeply attached to our sense of self, to our body, to the illusion that we're permanent, that we're somehow exempt from the universal law of decay.
And seeing directly that bodies fall apart.
Loosens that grip. Seeing that this body, which seems so solid, so permanent, so me, is actually a temporary configuration that will return to its elements, just like every other body ever.
So it's not morbid, it's medicine.
Strong medicine. Not for everyone, not at every stage of practice. You don't start your meditation career in a charnel ground. But for those who were ready, for those who needed that direct confrontation with impermanence, it could produce breakthrough insights that nothing else could produce.
There are 9 cemetery contemplations, right?
Yes. The Satipatthana Sutta, one of the core Buddhist meditation texts, describes 9 stages of observing a corpse. From freshly dead to bloated. From being eaten by various creatures, to scattered bones, to dust. Each stage is an object of sustained contemplation.
That's methodical.
Very. It's not random morbid fascination, it's structured practice with specific purposes. Each stage teaches something about the body's nature. The bloating teaches about internal processes of decay. The scattered bones teach about dissolution. The dust teaches about the ultimate fate of all form.
In Tibetan Buddhism, don't they have similar practices?
Even more elaborate in some ways. The Tibetan tradition developed detailed contemplations of death and dying. They have practices where you visualize your own death step by step. The cessation of breath, the dissolving of elements, the journey of consciousness after death,
The Bardo Thodal.
which we usually call the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Though that's a somewhat misleading translation, it's actually a guide for the consciousness between death and rebirth. But it was also meant to be studied and practiced during life.
So not just for when you're dying.
No, the whole point is to prepare. To become so familiar with the death process through repeated contemplation that when it comes, you're not shocked, not confused, not gripped by fear. You know the territory. You can move through it with awareness.
That's like rehearsal for dying.
Exactly. And that rehearsal transforms how you live. Because you're not hiding from death anymore. You're in relationship with it.
I've seen images of Tibetan monks drinking from skull cups.
Kapala. Ritual vessels made from the tops of human skulls. And yes, that's not macabre decoration or shock value. It's constant reminder. Every time you drink from that cup, you're reminded that this is what bodies become. This is what your body will become. The skull that's now a cup was once someone's face, someone's thoughts, someone's identity.
There's something almost aesthetic about it, though. Beautiful, even.
Which is part of the point. Death doesn't have to be hidden or feared. It can be integrated into the aesthetic of life. The skull can be art. The corpse can be teacher. Death can be beautiful in its own way, or at least not ugly.
Tibet also has sky burial, right?
Yes. In traditional sky burial, bodies are placed on mountaintops to be consumed by vultures. The flesh is stripped away, sometimes with ritual assistance, and offered to the birds. The reasoning is practical in some ways. The ground is often too hard to dig in Tibet, and wood is scarce for cremation.
So necessity created the practice?
Partially. But there's also deep teaching in it. The body returns to nature. It feeds other beings. There's no clinging to the corpse because there's nothing left to cling to. The person you loved becomes quite literally the flight of birds.
That's such a different attitude than the modern Western obsession with preserving bodies. Embalming, sealed caskets, burial vaults.
As if we could somehow keep death from fully happening. As if the body could be held in permanent suspension. The Buddhists would see that as the ultimate delusion. The body isn't you. Trying to preserve it is attachment at its most futile.
But the practice isn't just about accepting death intellectually. You said it transforms life?
The Buddha taught that meditating on death should be done daily. He said a monk should consider, I am surely going to die. Death cannot be avoided. Not occasionally. Not when the mood strikes. Daily. Because forgetting death makes us live carelessly.
In what way carelessly?
We postpone what matters. We chase what doesn't. We assume we have endless time. We put off reconciliation, put off adventure, put off becoming who we want to be. We figure we'll get to it later. And then later never comes.
And then we don't.
And then we don't. A Buddhist monk who contemplates death each morning approaches the day differently than someone who pretends they'll live forever. Every interaction might be the last. Every opportunity to practice kindness, to wake up, to be present. This might be it.
It creates urgency.
Healthy urgency. Not anxious urgency. Not, I'm gonna die so nothing matters. More like, I'm gonna die so everything matters. Because everything is precious when you recognize it won't last.
All right. Now let's go somewhere completely different. Dia de los Muertos. Because the energy there feels entirely different from Stoic severity or Buddhist charnel grounds.
It is different. And it's a beautiful example of how death awareness doesn't have to be solemn. It can be joyful, colorful, celebratory.
Mexican families literally have parties in cemeteries.
They do. The Day of the Dead, which actually spans a few days at the end of October and beginning of November, involves building elaborate altars called ofrendas, decorating graves, bringing food and music and flowers to cemeteries, and essentially spending time with the dead as if they were still present.
Which they are, in a sense, for those days.
In the belief system, yes. The souls of the departed return to visit their families. The veil between worlds thins, so you prepare their favorite foods, you set out their photographs, you play their favorite music, you clean and decorate their graves and then sit with them, eat with them, talk to them.
There's so much colour and joy in it, though. The sugar skulls, the marigolds, the skeleton figures doing everyday activities.
Laughing skeletons, dancing skeletons, skeletons getting married, playing music, riding bicycles. La Katrina in her fancy hat. This elegant skeleton woman who's become an icon. Death isn't the Grim Reaper in this tradition. Death is a family member who just happens to be dead. Death is a neighbour. Death is something you can dance with.
I love that framing. Death as a relative.
Someone you've known your whole life. Someone who will eventually take you home. Not an enemy to be feared, but a companion to be acknowledged.
And the roots go back to pre-Columbian cultures.
Far back. The Aztecs and other Mesoamerican peoples had a very different relationship with death than European Christianity did. They saw death as a continuation, not an ending. A different form of existence, not obliteration. The dead were still present, still influencing, still needing attention.
Tell me about the Aztec piece.
The Aztecs had an entire lord of the underworld, Mictlantecutli. He wasn't evil or frightening in the way the Christian devil was. He was just in charge of the dead. He received them, watched over them. The underworld itself, Mictlan, was where most people went after death. Not a punishment, just the next phase. The continuation of existence in a different form.
No heaven or hell.
Not exactly in the Christian sense. There were different afterlife destinations depending on how you died. Warriors who died in battle went somewhere different than people who died of old age. Women who died in childbirth had their own afterlife. But the point is, death wasn't this terrifying ending to be avoided at all costs. It was part of the cycle.
And that's still there in Dia de los Muertos.
Very much so. The Spanish conquistadors and Catholic missionaries tried to stamp out the indigenous death practices. They partially succeeded in shifting the timing to align with All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. But they couldn't eliminate the fundamental attitude, the joy, the familiarity, the sense that the dead are still with us, still part of the family.
There's something psychologically healthy about that, isn't there? Like we've lost something by making death so separate.
We've lost a lot. In Mexican culture, or in cultures that preserve this kind of death intimacy, there's less death anxiety in some studies. Children grow up seeing skulls as playful, not frightening. Families gather at graves to celebrate, not just to mourn once and then avoid the cemetery for years.
It normalizes death.
And normalizing death doesn't mean trivializing it. It means integrating it. The grief is still real. The loss is still felt. People cry at Dia de los Muertos. But there's also laughter. There's also food and music and stories about the dead person. The relationship continues.
The relationship with the dead person still continues.
You still talk to them. You still feed them symbolically. You still include them in family gatherings. They still matter. They haven't been erased or hidden away.
This connects to something we see across traditions, doesn't it? Ancestor veneration.
Everywhere. In Chinese tradition, Japanese tradition, Korean tradition. Throughout Africa, indigenous cultures across the Americas and Australia and the Pacific. The ancestors aren't gone. They're present in a different way, and maintaining relationship with them is considered essential for both the living and the dead.
We've really cut ourselves off from that in the modern West.
Almost completely. We put bodies in boxes, in the ground, and try not to think about them again except maybe on the anniversary of their death. The cemetery is a place to avoid, not a place to picnic. And I think we've lost something enormous in that severance.
Let's talk about another tradition before we move on, the samurai.
Ah, yes. The Japanese warrior class had some of the most rigorous death contemplation practices in any culture.
Bushido, right?
The way of the warrior. And at its heart was what the Hagakure, the famous samurai text, calls the way of dying. It opens with the line, "The way of the samurai is found in death."
That sounds intense.
It's meant to be. The teaching was that a samurai should meditate on death every morning and every evening. Visualize your death in every possible form. Being cut down in battle, drowning, burning. being struck by lightning. Make death your constant companion.
Why would anyone want to do that?
Because when death is already accepted, you become free. The samurai who has died in his imagination 1,000 times doesn't hesitate in combat. He doesn't cling to life in ways that would compromise his duty or his honor. He's already let go of the outcome.
So it's about freedom, not morbidity.
Exactly. The Hagakure says that by keeping death in mind at all times, you can accomplish any task. Because the fear of death is what holds most people back. They hesitate, they protect themselves, they play it safe. But the samurai who has already accepted death acts without that constraint.
There's something similar in the Stoic approach, isn't there?
Very much so. Different cultural context, different specific practices, but the same underlying insight. That accepting mortality frees you to live more fully. The fear of death makes cowards of us all, as Shakespeare put it. Releasing that fear makes courage possible.
And the Egyptians had death practices too.
The Egyptians were obsessed with death, but in a particular way. Their entire religious culture was oriented toward the afterlife. The elaborate tombs, the mummification, the Book of the Dead with its spells and instructions for navigating the underworld.
They spent enormous resources on death.
More than on the living, in many cases. The pharaohs would start building their tombs the moment they took the throne. Their entire reign was, in a sense, preparation for death. And this wasn't seen as dark or morbid, it was seen as the most important work you could do.
Because the afterlife was more real to them than this life?
In some ways, yes. This life was the waiting room. The afterlife was eternity. So, of course, you'd put your best resources toward eternity. It's Memento Mori institutionalized, a culture that understood how dangerous it is to forget your mortality, especially when you have power. Power can make you feel immortal, and that feeling is dangerous for everyone around you.
Now, medieval Europe did have death practices, though. It wasn't always this way in the West.
No. Medieval Christians were intensely focused on death. Perhaps obsessively so, but in a different register than the Mexican or Buddhist approaches.
Tell me about the Ars Moriendi.
The art of dying. These were manuals that became incredibly popular in the 15th century, especially after the Black Death had killed something like a third of Europe. Suddenly, death was everywhere, inescapable, and people needed guidance.
Practical guidance?
Both practical and spiritual. These books laid out what to expect in the dying process, the physical stages, the temptations that would come, the demons that might appear to claim your soul, and how to resist them through faith and prayer and proper confession.
So very Christian in framework.
Deeply Christian. The deathbed was seen as the ultimate spiritual arena. Everything you'd done in life came down to this moment. Would you maintain faith? Would you repent properly? Would you resist the devil's final temptations? Would angels or demons take your soul?
High stakes.
The highest imaginable. Your eternal fate hung in the balance. Which is why preparing for death wasn't morbid in this framework. It was the most important work you could do.
And these manuals helped people prepare.
They were immensely popular, mass-produced after the printing press came along. They included illustrations showing the dying person in bed, surrounded by angels and demons fighting for their soul. Very vivid, very direct.
That's actually beautiful in a way, a whole culture organized around supporting the dying.
Death was communal. It happened at home, surrounded by family and neighbors and clergy. People knew what to expect because they'd seen it before, many times. There were rituals, traditions, established ways of being present to death. You weren't alone.
And then there's the visual culture. Dance macabre.
The dance of death. These incredible paintings and woodcuts showing skeletons dancing with people from every level of society. The king, the pope, the merchant, the peasant, the child, the beautiful young woman. Death takes everyone.
Memento Mori made visual.
Exactly. You couldn't escape it in medieval Europe. These images were in churches, in public buildings, in books. Everywhere you looked, you were reminded that you too would dance with death. That your station in life, your wealth, your power, none of it exempted you.
There's something democratic about that.
Radically so. In a society built on hierarchy, death was the great equalizer. The skeleton doesn't care if you're a king or a peasant. It takes you just the same.
And the vanitas paintings later on.
Still lifes filled with symbols of mortality and the passing of time. Skulls, obviously, but also wilting flowers, rotting fruit, burning candles, hourglasses, soap bubbles, musical instruments with broken strings. Everything that seems beautiful and permanent is actually fragile and fleeting.
There's something almost meditative about those paintings. I've sat with a few in museums.
They're designed for contemplation, not just, oh, a skull, but sustained looking that eventually shifts something inside you. The beauty is there alongside the death. They're not separate. The flower is beautiful precisely because it's dying.
That's the Memento Mori again.
In visual form. The message is, you look at this beautiful arrangement, this abundance of fruit and flowers and fine objects, and you're reminded that it's all passing. And so are you. Enjoy it, yes, but don't forget what's coming. Alright, so we have the Stoics, the Buddhists, the Mexican traditions, medieval Christianity, all these different cultures, different times, different frameworks, and all of them arriving at the same conclusion, that consciously remembering death changes how you live.
Why do you think that is? Why does this pattern appear everywhere?
Well, there's modern research on this now. Terror management theory.
That sounds ominous.
It's actually fascinating. It started in the 1980s with social psychologists. Sheldon Solomon, Jeff Greenberg, Tom Pischinsky. They were building on Ernest Becker's work, particularly his book, The Denial of Death, which won the Pulitzer Prize in 1974.
What's the core idea?
That human beings are unique among animals in knowing we're going to die. We have self-awareness, we can project into the future, and therefore we know with certainty that death awaits us. And that knowledge creates a kind of existential terror that we have to manage somehow.
Because otherwise it would paralyze us.
Right. If you thought about death constantly, in its full weight, you might not be able to function. So we have to do something with that awareness. And according to terror management theory, most of what we do in life is an unconscious attempt to manage that terror.
How so?
We create cultural worldviews that give us a sense of meaning and permanence. We pursue self-esteem, which makes us feel like we matter, like we're significant, like we're part of something that will outlast our physical death. We have children, write books, build institutions, create art, all of it seeking what Becker called symbolic immortality.
All to not have to face that we're going to die.
That's the theory. And the researchers have done hundreds of studies showing that when you remind people of their mortality, even subtly, their behavior changes in predictable ways. They cling more tightly to their worldviews. They become more defensive of their culture, more hostile to outsiders, more anxious, more tribal.
That doesn't sound like what the Stoics were going for.
No. And this is where it gets interesting. The terror management research mostly studied what happens when death awareness is triggered subliminally or briefly, without the person consciously processing it. Quick exposure to death-related words or images, then measuring behavior afterwards.
So sneaking death into their awareness.
Right? Just a flash. Enough to activate the fear, but not enough for conscious engagement. And when death is processed unconsciously like that, it tends to produce those defensive reactions. Cling to your worldview, attack the other, distract yourself.
But that's not what happens with deliberate practice.
No. Some researchers started asking a different question. What happens when you consciously contemplate death? When you actually sit with it? Like the Stoics or Buddhists recommended? When you face it rather than fleeing from it?
Different results.
Dramatically different. People who consciously and reflectively engage with their mortality show increased gratitude, more desire to help others, deeper appreciation for close relationships, and less materialism. They become more present, more authentic, less concerned with status or acquiring things.
That's exactly what the ancient practices were claiming.
Which suggests they weren't just guessing. They'd figured something out experientially that psychology is now confirming empirically. The difference is in how you approach death awareness.
So it matters how you think about death.
Enormously. Hiding from it or having it sneak up on you unconsciously produces fear and defensiveness. Deliberately turning toward it with practice and support produces wisdom and presence.
That's a significant finding.
Very. And it explains why the modern approach of hiding death away might actually be making things worse. We think we're protecting ourselves from death anxiety by not thinking about it. But the anxiety doesn't go away. It just goes underground. And from there, it drives all sorts of unconscious behaviors.
Like what?
Conspicuous consumption, for one. Buying things to feel significant, to feel like we matter. Status seeking, workaholism, all these ways we try to build up a sense of importance that might survive our death. I may die, but look what I accomplished. Look what I owned. Look how successful I was.
But that doesn't actually address the underlying fear.
It can't. It's not designed to address it. It's designed to avoid it. And the avoidance keeps the fear alive, driving more and more compensatory behavior.
Can we talk about what's happened to death in modern life? Because I feel like there's a stark contrast with everything we've been describing.
There's a complete inversion. For most of human history, death happened at home. It was witnessed by family members, including children. Bodies were prepared by loved ones. The dying process was observed directly. People knew what death looked like because they'd seen it.
And now?
Now, death happens in hospitals, behind closed doors, managed by professionals. The dying person is often sedated. Family may or may not be present. The body is whisked away to funeral homes where it's embalmed and made to look not dead.
Made to look asleep.
Peaceful. As if they're just resting. Which is a strange lie we tell ourselves. They're not resting. They're dead. But we can't seem to look at that directly.
And then the body goes into a sealed casket.
Into a concrete burial vault, as if we're trying to prevent death from fully completing. As if keeping the body from returning to Earth somehow keeps the person from being fully gone.
I hadn't thought about it that way. We're literally sealing death away.
Underground, behind concrete, in a box, hidden. And we've medicalized the whole process, turned death into a failure of treatment rather than a natural completion of life.
Death as medical failure?
Doctors are trained to fight death, to see it as the enemy. And when someone dies, even someone very old who's lived a full life, there's often this sense that something went wrong, that we didn't try hard enough, that the system failed.
That the medical system failed somehow.
Right. Instead of death being natural and expected, it's unexpected and wrong, which means we're never prepared for it. It always comes as a shock, even when the person was 90 years old and had been declining for months.
This must have psychological consequences.
Massive ones. We've created a culture where death is the ultimate taboo. People don't know how to talk about it, how to be with dying people, how to grieve. Every death is a crisis rather than a passage.
And that denial, you're saying, doesn't actually protect us.
The terror management research suggests it makes us more anxious, not less. We've built elaborate defenses against death awareness, entertainment, consumption, constant distraction, the endless scroll. But underneath all of it, the fear is still there, just unprocessed.
I read somewhere that Americans spend more on funerals than on many major life events.
And we still don't know what to do with ourselves when someone dies. We fumble through it. We don't have the rituals, the practices, the cultural containers that help people grieve and integrate loss.
That's what the ancient practices provided.
Exactly. The Stoics had their evening reflection. The Buddhists had their charnel ground contemplation and their daily mindfulness of death. The Mexicans have their Dia de los Muertos. Medieval Christians had the Ars Moriendi and the communal deathbed. These weren't just abstract beliefs. They were practices that help people stay in right relationship with death throughout their lives.
There's something happening now, though, isn't there? A recovery of some of this.
The death positive movement. It started gaining momentum in the 2010s. People who felt that the modern death denial was making things worse, not better.
What are they advocating for?
Open conversation about death and dying. Alternatives to traditional embalming and burial. Green burial, natural burial. Returning bodies to the earth in more direct ways. Death cafes where people gather to discuss mortality over tea and cake.
Death cafes? That sounds very British.
It actually started in London. The idea was simple. Create a space where people can talk about death without it being a crisis. Just talk about it. Normalize the conversation. And it's spread worldwide. Thousands of death cafes in dozens of countries now.
That's actually similar to what we're doing here.
In a way, yes. Breaking the taboo. Having the conversation. Not because we're morbid, but because the silence around death is making everything harder.
And there's the death doula movement.
Yes. End-of-life doulas who accompany the dying process, the way birth doulas accompany birth. Helping people prepare, being present during the actual dying, supporting families.
a professional presence for death.
Which sounds strange until you remember that we used to have this. Communities had people who were good at being with the dying, who knew the rituals, knew what to say, knew how to create space for the passage. We've lost that collective knowledge. Death doulas are helping recover it.
And hospice care too, that's relatively new, isn't it?
The modern hospice movement started in the 1960s, largely through the work of Cicely Saunders in England. The idea was radical at the time. Stop trying to fight death and start focusing on quality of remaining life, comfort rather than cure, dignity rather than intervention.
Which is actually the ancient approach, isn't it?
Very much so. The Ars Moriendi was all about dying well, not about postponing death indefinitely. Hospice recovers that wisdom in a medical context. It says, sometimes death isn't a failure. Sometimes accepting death is the most loving thing we can do.
There's something hopeful in all of this, like people are waking up to what was lost.
I think they are. There's a hunger for a better relationship with mortality. People sense that the modern approach isn't working, that hiding from death isn't making us happier or healthier, that we need these practices, these conversations, these communities of support.
What about near-death experiences? That's become a whole field of study now.
It has. Researchers like Raymond Moody, Kenneth Ring, and more recently Sam Parnia have been studying what happens when people clinically die and then are resuscitated, what they report experiencing.
The tunnel of light, the life review, all of that?
Yes, though it's more varied than the popular image suggests. But what's interesting from a death awareness perspective is what happens to people after these experiences. They almost universally report less fear of death, more appreciation for life, changed priorities.
Sounds like what the ancient practices were trying to produce.
Exactly. It's as if having a direct brush with death, even a brief one, produces the same transformation that years of deliberate death contemplation can produce. The near-death experiences come back with different values. They care less about status and acquisition. They care more about relationships and meaning.
Which suggests there's something real about this effect, not just wishful thinking.
The mechanism seems to be, when you confront death directly, everything gets reorganized around what actually matters. The trivia falls away, and that reorganization sticks.
Psychedelic therapy is touching on similar territory now, isn't it?
Yes. Researchers are studying psilocybin, MDMA, and other compounds for end-of-life anxiety. And what they're finding is that mystical experiences, including experiences of ego death during psychedelic sessions, can dramatically reduce the fear of death in terminal patients.
Ego death is interesting in this context.
It's the experience of the self dissolving, even temporarily. And people who go through it report that death seems less frightening afterwards, because they've already experienced a kind of death. The loss of the sense of self that we cling to so tightly.
So the body doesn't die, but the sense of a separate self dissolves.
And that turns out to be enough to shift the relationship with mortality. The thing we fear losing most isn't the body, it's the self. And if you've already experienced the dissolution of self and discovered that consciousness continues, or that there's nothing to fear in that dissolution, physical death becomes less terrifying.
This is fascinating territory.
It is. And it's all converging on the same insight the ancients had, that our fear of death drives so much of our suffering and our dysfunction. And that working with that fear, rather than hiding from it, is one of the most liberating things a human being can do.
So what do we do with all this? If you're someone listening who wants to work with death awareness, but you don't have a charnel ground nearby, and you're not part of a tradition that celebrates Dia de los Muertos,
You don't need decomposing corpses. That was one specific method for one specific context. The principle underneath it is what matters.
and the principle is
Regular, conscious contemplation of your mortality. Not in a morbid way, not obsessing about death, but keeping it present enough that it shapes your choices and clarifies your priorities.
the Stoics did it through evening reflection.
Which anyone can do. At the end of each day, review how you spent your hours, and ask yourself, if this had been my last day, would I be satisfied with how I lived it?
That's confronting but not complicated.
No complexity required. The question does the work. And over time, it starts to shift things. The trivial falls away. What matters comes forward. You stop postponing the important conversations, the meaningful projects, the expressions of love.
What about the morning? Marcus Aurelius had that practice too, didn't he?
Yes. Beginning the day by acknowledging that you might not see its end. This day could be your last. Given that possibility, how do you want to move through it? What deserves your attention? What's a waste of your remaining time?
I've been doing something similar since that cemetery walk, actually. And from knowing and doing research for this episode, just briefly in the morning, acknowledging that nothing's guaranteed, that I might not have tomorrow.
And what have you noticed?
Less wasted time, less tolerance for things that drain me, more presence, I guess, more willingness to say what I actually mean instead of being polite, more willingness to do what I actually want instead of what's expected.
That's exactly the transformation the ancients described.
But it's also made me more grateful, which surprised me. I thought death awareness would be heavy, would make everything feel dark or pointless. But it's made me appreciate ordinary things more. Coffee in the morning, conversations with friends, the way light looks through leaves.
Because you're not taking them for granted anymore. The background assumption that everything will be here tomorrow has loosened. And in that loosening, there's space for appreciation.
Things become precious when you realize they won't last.
The Buddhist teaching exactly. Impermanence isn't a curse. It's what gives things value. A flower that lasted forever would be boring. It's beautiful, precisely because it fades.
There's a practice I've heard about where you look at people and silently acknowledge that they're dying.
Yes, not in a morbid way, just noticing. You look at someone, anyone, a stranger on the street, and you silently acknowledge that person is going to die. Just like me. And something shifts. You see them differently. The irritation you might feel, the judgment, it softens. Because you're both in this together. You're both facing the same fate.
That sounds like a variation on metta practice. Loving kindness meditation.
It's related. But instead of wishing them well, you're simply acknowledging shared mortality. And that acknowledgement creates a kind of tenderness. We're all in this together. We're all going to die. The competition, the conflict, the separation, it all seems less important when you remember that.
I want to try that.
Try it on the tube or in a queue somewhere. Just look at people and silently acknowledge dying, dying, dying. We're all dying. And notice what happens in your heart.
It's funny, isn't it? That something so dark could create tenderness.
It's not dark, though. That's what we keep coming back to. Death awareness isn't darkness. It's clarity. It's presence. It's appreciation for what is, while it is.
There's something about the body dimension of this too, isn't there? We work with that in our tradition.
We do. Death awareness isn't just a mental exercise. The body carries its own relationship with mortality.
What do you mean?
Well, the body knows things the mind doesn't admit. The body knows it's vulnerable, that it can be hurt, that it's slowly declining. There's a somatic intelligence there that's already in touch with impermanence.
And there are physical practices that access that.
I can't get into specifics of what we do in our tradition, but there are public examples. Cold exposure is one. When you're in cold water or taking a cold shower, there's a moment where your body's survival systems activate. The gas reflex, the racing heart. You're right at the edge of what feels tolerable.
And that's a death practice?
In a sense, it's a brush with physical extremity that wakes you up. The Stoics did this. Cold baths were part of their discipline, not just for physical toughness, but for keeping the body connected to its own vulnerability.
The body remembers that it's not invincible?
Exactly. Comfort makes us forget that we're mortal. We sit in climate-controlled rooms, eating abundant food, protected from the elements, and the body starts to believe it's permanent. Cold exposure, fasting, even certain kinds of physical exertion, they remind the body of its limits.
Fasting too, right?
Similar principle. When you voluntarily experience hunger, you remember that the body is a dependent creature. It needs things. It's fragile. It will die if those needs aren't met. You can't just think your way past its requirements.
So the body practices ground the philosophical insights.
They make them real. You can philosophically agree that you're mortal. You can nod along to Marcus Aurelius, but until your body feels its vulnerability, there's a gap between knowledge and wisdom. The body has to catch up to what the mind knows.
This is what we mean by integration. Mind, body, spirit.
The spirit dimension provides the meaning framework, why death contemplation matters, what it opens up philosophically and spiritually, how it connects to questions of purpose and consciousness, and what survives bodily death.
The mind dimension gives you psychological tools.
For working with death anxiety, with resistance, with the patterns that keep you in denial. There are specific techniques for interrupting the avoidance, for staying present to what arises when mortality is contemplated.
And the body dimension brings it into lived, felt experience.
So you're not just thinking about death, you're embodying a different relationship with it. Your nervous system shifts, your daily habits change, the wisdom becomes cellular, not just conceptual.
And that takes time to develop.
Years, really. You can't just decide to be at peace with death and have it happen. There's work involved, progressive practice, support from someone who's walked this path, which is why in our order we spend years working through these traditions systematically.
15 pillars, 15 ancient traditions, all saying the same thing from different perspectives.
And death contemplation weaves through many of them. The Stoic pillar directly, yes. Marcus Aurelius's Meditations is one of our primary texts there. We work with the evening reflection, the morning preparation, all of it. But the Buddhist material touches on impermanence throughout. The mystery traditions have death and rebirth at their very center. The Vedantic teachings explore what's immortal, what consciousness actually is, what survives.
Each one offering a different angle on the same truth.
Different doorways into the same room. The Greek approach is about living with excellence while death waits. The Buddhist approach is about dissolving attachment through impermanence contemplation. The mystery traditions work with actual death and rebirth experiences. The Vedantic material distinguishes between what dies and what doesn't.
All pointing at the same reality.
But from different angles, with different practices, addressing different aspects of the human being. By the time you've worked through all of them, your relationship with mortality has fundamentally shifted. Not because you've read about it, but because you've practiced it, embodied it, integrated it across all three dimensions.
That's what a podcast can't do.
No, we can talk about these things. We can inspire interest. We can share the wisdom. But the actual transformation requires direct work. One-on-one guidance, daily practice, time, a complete system that addresses mind and body and spirit together.
For those who are serious about this work,
visit maaoot.org. That's the website. See if it resonates. Read about what we offer. Not everyone is called to this kind of systematic work. But for those who are, it's there.
before we wrap up, I want to address something, because death is a heavy topic, and I know some people listening might be going through actual experiences with death right now, grief, loss, maybe facing their own mortality with a diagnosis.
Yes, we should speak to that directly.
We're not therapists. This isn't therapy. We're exploring wisdom traditions. But if you're in actual crisis, if you're struggling with grief or death anxiety in ways that are overwhelming you, please reach out to someone who can actually help. A therapist, a counselor, a doctor, a trusted friend.
These ancient practices can be powerful, but they're not meant to be worked with alone, especially during acute difficulty. The Stoics had their schools, their teachers, their fellow practitioners. The Buddhists have their Sangha, their community of practice.
Right, this is meant to be done in relationship with support. The podcast is conversation, not supported.
And if you're intrigued by what we're discussing, but in a stable enough place to explore it, there are gentle ways to begin. Evening reflection, morning acknowledgement, nothing extreme, nothing that overwhelms your system.
Start small.
Always start small. A few moments at the end of the day asking honest questions about how you spent your time. That's enough to begin shifting things. And if you're called to deeper work, systematic work, that's what our tradition offers. But only when you're ready, and only with proper guidance.
Can you leave us with one thing, one image, one idea from all of this that you think captures the essence?
Honestly, it's something Marcus Aurelius wrote. He said, "Think of yourself as dead. You have lived your life. Now take what's left and live it properly."
That's the reframe, isn't it?
Everything before this moment is gone. Your life as it was, already complete. And now you've been given these extra hours, these extra days, maybe years if you're lucky, not owed to you, given.
What do you do with a gift like that?
That's the question Memento Mori leaves you with. What do you do with the gift of remaining time? Do you waste it on things that don't matter? Do you spend it anxious and distracted? Or do you live it properly?
The ancients knew that keeping death close was the best way to answer that question well.
They figured out that mortality isn't the enemy of a good life. It's the precondition for one. Without death, nothing would have urgency. Nothing would have preciousness. Everything would be infinitely postponable.
Death is what gives our choices weight.
Every culture that discovered this truth developed practices for staying in touch with it. Practices that we've largely lost in the modern world. But they're still here. They can be recovered. They can be worked with.
And that work transforms.
It does. Not overnight. Not through reading about it or listening to podcasts about it. But through actual practice, sustained over time, supported by teachers and community. That's what transforms.
Before we go, we've got a couple of listener questions.
Always good to hear what's landing for people.
This first one is from Miriam in Charlotte, North Carolina. She writes, I've been trying to practice Wu Wei since your episode on effortless action, but I can't tell the difference between genuine non-forcing and just being lazy. How do I know if I'm flowing or just avoiding?
Oh, that's such an honest question. And I think everyone who works with the Wu Wei hits this exact confusion.
It's tricky because from the outside, they can look identical, sitting on the couch doing nothing.
Right. But they feel completely different on the inside. Laziness has a quality of avoidance to it. There's something you know you should be doing, and you're not doing it. And underneath, there's this low-level anxiety or guilt.
A kind of heaviness.
Exactly. Whereas genuine Wu Wei has a quality of responsiveness. You're not forcing, but you're also not avoiding. You're available. If something needs to be done and the moment is right, you do it without struggle. If nothing needs to be done, you rest without guilt.
So one way to check is to ask yourself, am I at peace right now? Or am I hiding from something?
That's a good test. Another is to notice what happens when an opportunity or demand arises. The lazy person feels irritated, interrupted. The person in Wu Wei responds fluidly because they weren't clinging to inaction. They were just present.
Miriam, I'd also say that the fact you're asking this question suggests you're not just being lazy. Lazy doesn't interrogate itself this way.
Good point. The very awareness that there might be a difference is itself a sign of something genuine happening.
Our second question is from Kenji in Vancouver. He writes, the episode on the wound and the gift really landed for me. I've started to see my difficult childhood differently. But how do I know when I've actually transformed a wound into a gift versus just intellectualizing my trauma?
Another searingly honest question.
These are good ones today.
The difference between genuine transformation and intellectualization. This is so important because the mind is very clever at creating the appearance of healing without the substance of it.
We can build beautiful stories about our wounds.
And those stories can become another layer of defense. I've transformed my trauma can itself become a way of not feeling it.
So what's the test?
A few things. First, does the wound still have charge? If someone mentions the topic and you feel a flash of defensiveness, or you rush to explain how you've worked through it, there's probably more to do.
The need to announce the healing.
Right. Genuine transformation tends to be quieter. You can talk about what happened without needing to frame it. The story doesn't have to be told a particular way to feel safe.
What else?
The gift should be evident in your life, not just your understanding. If the wound has genuinely transformed, it's showing up as capacity. Maybe you're able to be with others who are suffering in a way you couldn't before. Maybe you have patience or compassion that clearly grew from that soil.
So it's not just a reframe in your head, it's visible in how you live.
And honestly, Kenji, the fact that you're questioning whether you've truly transformed it rather than just intellectualized it is a healthy sign. The intellectualizers usually don't ask that question. They're too busy explaining their breakthrough.
The work is ongoing anyway. It's not like you transform a wound once and you're done forever.
No. You meet it again at different depths, different life stages. The gift keeps revealing new facets. So even if you have genuinely transformed something, there's probably more there. And that's not failure. That's just how this works.
Thanks for both questions. Keep them coming. podcast@maaoot.org. All right. If you've stayed with us through this conversation, thank you. We don't take it for granted that you've given us an hour of your finite life.
Quite literally finite, as we've been discussing.
If anything we've talked about sparked something for you, questions, disagreements, experiences of your own, we'd love to hear about it. Email us at podcast@maaoot.org. That's podcast@maaoot.org.
Your questions often shape what we explore next. Your experiences enrich these conversations.
And if you're curious about the systematic work we do in our order, if you're called to that kind of multi-year commitment through these wisdom traditions with personal guidance and daily practice,
visit maaoot.org. See if it resonates. Not everyone is called to this, but for those who are, it's there.
Finally, quick request.
The part where we ask for help.
If you've made it this far, you're clearly getting something from this. Reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify genuinely matter. The algorithms pay attention. A quick 5-star rating helps new people find us.
And if writing a review feels like too much, just telling a friend about us works even better.
We don't have a marketing department. We don't have ads. We have listeners who share episodes with people they think might appreciate them.
That's how this grows. Thank you for being part of that. Ab immemorabili. From time beyond memory.
Keep remembering.
Keep living properly.
The wisdom you seek has always been within you.
You're not learning it. You're remembering it.
Until next time.